General Keith Kellogg was talking about strikes with ATACMS missiles deep into Russia, not about sea-based Tomahawk missiles. As of today, the U.S. has only 2 ground-based launchers for Tomahawk missiles in service. Manhattan University professor Igor Aizenberg said this on Espreso TV. I think that General Keith Kellogg was referring to strikes with ATACMS missiles, which Ukraine already has in its arsenal. As for the Tomahawk, it is a sea-based missile. The U.S. had a ground-based version of these missiles, and there were many of them, but they were all destroyed in accordance with the 1987 U.S Soviet treaty, and their production was stopped. Russia violated this treaty after the collapse of the Soviet Union, so the U.S. withdrew from it in 2019 and began developing new launchers to fire Tomahawks from the ground, Aizenberg noted. According to the Manhattan University professor, the first Typhoon launchers for Tomahawk missiles entered service with the U.S. Army in 2024. As far as is known, only 2 batteries were deployed at that time, one in the Philippines, the other in the U.S. In July of last year, President Joe Biden made a decision to deploy such a battery in Germany in 2026. There is speculation that Donald Trump, during a conversation with Volodymyr Zelenski, promised that Ukraine could also receive such systems. However, their production is currently just ramping up. If Trump supports this decision, even if it is made next year, for example, Germany could buy these systems for subsequent transfer to Ukraine. I think no one will object to this. Aizenberg added, recall, President Trump has authorized long-range strikes into Russia. General Keith Kellogg says, though Ukraine hasn't always received Pentagon approval to carry them out, everyone should follow what the president says. He's the commander-in-chief by the Constitution, and everybody falls in line. When the president doesn't go left, you go left. If he says you go right, you right. That's the president. The last lot checked. None of us got electoral college votes. He did. So when the president said to do something, we just need to do that and complete the action, Kellogg said. When asking, Heinrich inquired whether it was the president's position that Ukraine could conduct long-range strikes into Russia and whether that had been authorized by him, and Kellogg replied that, based on what the president, Vice President Vance, and Secretary Rubio had stated, the answer was yes, adding that Ukraine should use the ability to strike deep and emphasizing that there are no such things as sanctuaries. Amid discussions of the possibility of Ukrainian strikes deep into Russian territory, we mustn't forget the large number of successful strikes by the Ukrainian defense forces against military installations in Russian-occupied Crimea. This in itself indicates serious steps toward destroying Russia's air and missile defense capabilities, and not just on the peninsula. Igor Romanenko, retired Lieutenant General, former Deputy Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, said this. According to him, the fact is that the enemy has defense priorities, Moscow, St. Petersburg, and certain military installations where they concentrate the largest concentration of air defense assets. This can be compared to the defense of the Kerch Strait Bridge in Crimea, which is protected from the air, on land and underwater. At the same time, talk of covering the entire peninsula with air defense systems is an exaggeration. He added, at the same time, the creation of corridors in the Crimean air defense system by the Ukrainian Defense Forces has quite practical significance in the war. Indeed, if we talk about the general trend, Ukraine is almost effective in striking enemy targets in two directions, the expert said. The first is strikes on facilities in the Russian Federation and in the occupied territories of Ukraine that are involved in the production, storage and transportation of fuel and lubricants. This has a significant negative impact on the economy and the supply of fuel to the Russian armed forces. We are not barbarians, but a long-standing democracy which helps Russians understand why gasoline is disappearing in Russia, which has invaded Ukraine with a war. The second is that after the Russian fleet is driven out of the Black Sea, targets in Russian-occupied Crimea are struck. For example, 3 Russian Mi-8 helicopters, the expensive Russian Nebo-U radar, 2 An-26 transport aircraft, and the MR-10M1 MIS M1 radar. Why not the Crimean Bridge? Because we have other priorities right now. The main one is right at the front. The bridge will come later. It will have its time, he told. Incidentally, the drone strikes on Foros were probably not in vain, given that there were officials there who were wounded or killed. This is important, both from the point of view of justice and from the point of view of morale and psychological pressure on the Russian leadership and Russians. However, to increase the effectiveness of strikes, the ability to reach much further than Crimea, for example, with the long-range Neptune or the new Ukrainian Flamingo missile, it is necessary to destroy more enemy air and missile defense systems. And this is precisely what is happening on the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula, as Crimea's geographic location is quite advantageous for this task. Therefore, we are now clearing corridors and practicing suppressing Russian air and missile defense systems. At the same time, we are accumulating weapons, including Flamingo missiles, Toloka, underwater drones, and so on. And we can expect the effectiveness of our strikes to increase soon, he said.